April 26th. April 26th, 1986. 1:23 in the morning. In the quiet Soviet city of Pripyat, nearly 50,000 people were asleep. The night was calm, the air was still. Streetlights reflected on empty roads. Windows were dark, curtains unmoving. And no one knew that at that exact moment, their lives had already changed forever. Just 3 kilometers away, inside the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, a safety test was being performed on Reactor 4. It was meant to be routine, a controlled experiment, something engineers had done before. But that night, a combination of human decisions, design flaws in the reactor, and unstable operating conditions created the perfect chain of events for disaster. Operators reduced power too quickly. The reactor became unstable. Control rods were inserted too late. In seconds, power surged beyond control. Fuel rods overheated. Steam pressure built violently inside the core. Then it happened. 2 explosions tore through the reactor building. Concrete was lifted like paper. The 1,000-ton steel lid of the reactor was thrown into the air. A column of radioactive debris and fire rose into the night sky. Invisible particles began drifting with the wind. But in Pripyat, people were still sleeping peacefully. The morning of April 26 began with a silence that felt like a blessing. Sunlight spilled over the balconies of the high-rise blocks, warming the bricks and the laundry hanging to dry. Families gathered in their kitchens, the steam from teacups rising into the air. In the parks, the trees were in full bloom, and the scent of spring was everywhere. People walked to work, nodding to neighbors, talking about their plans for the upcoming May Day celebrations. They talked about the new amusement park, about football matches, and about the long summer that lay ahead. They were living in the pride of the Soviet Union, unaware that their world had already ended at 1:23 in the morning. Then, the silence changed. It was no longer the silence of sleep, but the silence of a void, and the long, slow decay of Pripyat began. Once the last bus crossed the city limits, Pripyat became a ghost, trapped in a radioactive bubble. In those first few years, the city looked as if it were simply waiting for a heartbeat. The paint was still fresh on the doors, and the books were still tidy on the shelves. But the wind was the first to reclaim the territory. It found the weak spots in the glass, shattering the windows and inviting the rain inside. Water, the slow destroyer, began its work. It seeped into the wallpaper, turning it into a soggy, peeling mess. It found the iron inside the concrete walls and began to turn it into rust. Decades passed, and the city began to lose its shape. The grand sports halls, once filled with the sounds of cheering and bouncing balls, became cathedrals of rot. The wooden floors, soaked by decades of leaking roofs, began to buckle and swell, turning into a soft, dark soil. In the schools, the silence is heavy. The notebooks that children left on their desks have turned into a gray pulp, their words washed away by years of humidity. The chalkboards are cracked, holding the ghosts of lessons that were never finished. Nature did not wait for permission. It moved into the city with a quiet, relentless power. Trees began to sprout from the middle of the classrooms, their branches reaching through broken windows toward the sun. The wide boulevards, where thousands once marched, are now narrow paths through a dense, radioactive forest. Moss has covered the concrete like a thick green velvet, softening the sharp edges of a lost civilization. Vines climb the 16-story buildings, wrapping around the balconies like the fingers of a giant, ancient hand, slowly pulling the structures back into the earth. Then came the deep orange rot, the rust. The Ferris wheel, the silent giant of the city, has become a monument to decay. The yellow paint, once so bright and hopeful, has flaked away, revealing the crumbling iron beneath. When the wind catches the wheel, it groans, a long metallic shriek that sounds like the city itself is crying out. The bumper cars sit frozen in a graveyard of rust, their metal frames fused together by time, their electric sparks long forgotten. Inside the apartment blocks, the decay is more intimate, more painful. Kitchen tables, where families once shared bread, have collapsed into heaps of splinters and rusted nails. The refrigerators stand open and hollow, like empty tombs. The dolls in the kindergartens have lost their eyes and their limbs, their plastic bodies half buried in the fallen plaster. Gas masks lie scattered on the floor of the schools, their glass lenses reflecting the empty hallways like the eyes of insects. Every year, the city sinks a little deeper. The red stars on the rooftops, once symbols of an empire, are now heavy with rust, leaning precariously against the gray sky. Wolves move through the supermarket aisles. Deer graze in the courtyards of the hospitals. There are no human voices here, only the rustle of leaves inside an apartment on the 10th floor and the distant rhythmic drip of water. Pripyat is a place where the clocks have no hands. It is a memory that was never allowed to fade, but was never allowed to live. It is a radioactive museum of a broken dream, where the wallpaper peels like dead skin, and the silence is the only king. A place where time stopped at 1:23 in the morning. The people left. The building stayed. They stayed to rust, to rot, and to be forgotten. And the story of Chernobyl remains written in every rusted wheel, every broken window, and every silent, overgrown street.